Starting with the tradition about a half-yearly night of the gods, found everywhere in Sanskrit literature and also in the Avesta, we have found direct references in Rig-Veda to a long, continuous dawn of 30 days, the long day and the long night when the sun remained above the horizon or went below it for a number of 24 hours. We've also seen that the Rig-Vedic texts describe these things as events of a bygone age. The next question, therefore, is, do we meet in the Vedas with similar traces of the Arctic condition of seasons, months, or years? It is stated previously that the calendar current at the time of the Vedic Samhitas was different from the Arctic calendar, but if the ancestors of the Vedic people ever lived near the North Pole, we may, as observed by Sir Norman Lockyer, with reference to the older Egyptian calendar, always reckon upon the conservatism of the priests of the temples, retaining the tradition of the old rejected year in every case. Lockyer first points out how the ancient Egyptian year of 360 days was afterwards replaced by a year of 365 days, and then gives 2 instances of traditional practice by which the memory of the old year is preserved. Thus, even at Philae in later times, he says, in the Temple of Osiris, there were 360 bowls for sacrifice, which were filled daily with milk by a specified rotation of priests. At Acanthus, there was a perforated cask into which one of 360 priests poured water from the Nile daily. What took place in Egypt, we may expect to have taken place in Vedic times. The characteristics of an Arctic year are so unlike those of a year in the temperate zone that if the ancestors of the Vedic people ever lived within the Arctic regions and immigrated southwards owing to glaciation, an adaptation of the calendar to the altered geographical and astronomical conditions of the new home was a necessity and must have been effected at the time. But in making this change, we may, as remarked by Sir Norman Lockyer, certainly expect conservative priests to retain as much of the old calendar as possible, or at least preserve the traditions of the older year in one form or another, especially in their sacrificial rites. Indo-European etymological equations have established the fact that sacrifices, or rather the system of making offerings to the gods for various purposes, existed from the primeval period, and if so, the system must have undergone great modifications when the ancient races moved from the Arctic to the temperate zone. I have shown elsewhere that calendar and sacrifice, especially the annual satras, are closely connected, and that in the case of the annual satras or sacrificial sessions, which lasted for 1 year, the priests had in view, as observed by Dr. Haug, the yearly course of the sun. It was the duty of these priests to keep up sacrificial fire, as the Parsi priests now do, and to see that the yearly rounds of sacrifices were performed at the proper time. The sacrificial calendar of the Arctic home must, however, have been different from what it came to be afterwards, and happily many traces of this calendar are still discoverable in sacrificial literature of Vedic times, proving that the ancient worshippers, or sacrificers of our race, must have lived in circumpolar regions. But before discussing this evidence, it is necessary to briefly describe the points wherein we might expect the ancient or the oldest sacrificial system to differ from the one current in Vedic times. In the Samhitas and the Brâhmanas, the annual satras or yearly sacrificial sessions are said to extend over 12 months. This was impossible within the Arctic regions, where the sun goes below the horizon for a number of days or months during the year, thereby producing the long night. The oldest duration of the annual satras, if such satras were ever performed within the polar regions, would therefore be shorter than 12 months. In other words, an annual satra of less than 12 months would be the chief distinguishing mark of an older sacrificial system, as contrasted with the later annual satra of 12 months. It must also be borne in mind that the number of the months of sunshine and darkness cannot be the same everywhere in the circumpolar regions. At the pole, the sun is alternately above and below the horizon for 6 months each. But as all people cannot be expected to be stationed precisely at the pole, practically, the months of sunshine will vary from 7 to 11 for the inhabitants of the Arctic region, those living nearest the North Pole having 7 months of sunshine, while those living farther south from the pole having the sun above the horizon for 8, 9, or 10 months according to the latitude. These periods of sunshine would be made up of the long Arctic day at the place and a succession of ordinary days and nights closely following each other, and sacrificial sessions would be held, or principal business transacted, and social ceremonies performed only during this period. It would, so to say, be a period of action, followed by the long night by which it was followed. The long dawn following the long night would mark the beginning of this period of activity, and the Arctic sacrificial year would, practically, be made up of only these months of sunshine. Therefore, the varying number of months of sunshine would be the chief peculiarity of the Arctic sacrificial calendar, and we must bear it in mind in examining the traces of the oldest calendar in the Rig-Veda, or other Samhitas. A dawn of 30 days, as we measure days, implies a position so near the North Pole that the period of sunshine at the place could not have been longer than about 7 months, comprising, of course, a long day of 4 or 5 months and a succession of regular days and nights during the remaining period. And we find that the Rig-Veda does preserve for us the memory of such months of sunshine. We refer first to the legend of Aditi, or the 7 Adityas, which is obviously based on some natural phenomenon. This legend expressly tells us that the oldest number of the Adityas, or suns, was 7, and the same idea is independently found in many other places in the Rig-Veda. Thus, 7 Adityatas and 7 priests are mentioned together, though the names of the different sons are not given therein. In 2:27:1, Mitra, Ahriman, Bhaga, Varuna, Daksha, and Amsha are mentioned by name as so many different Adityatas, but the 7th is not named. This omission does not, however, mean much, as the septenary character of the sun is quite patent from the fact that he is called the 7-horsed, and his 7-wheeled chariot is said to be drawn by 7 bay steeds, or by a single horse with 7 names. The Artha Veda also speaks of 7 bright rays of sun, and the epithet Adyata is applied to the sun in Rig-Veda, is rendered more clearly as Aditi's son. Sayana, following Yeshka, derives this 7-fold character of the sun from its 7 rays, but why solar rays were taken to be 7 still remains unexplained, unless we hold that the Vedic bards had anticipated the discovery of 7 prismatic rays, or colors, which were unknown even to Yashka or Sayana. Again, though the existence of 7 suns may be explained on this hypothesis, it fails to account for the death of the 8th son, for the legend of Aditi tells us, of the 8 sons of Aditi who were born from her body, she approached the gods with 7 and cast out Mayurtanda. With 7 sons, Aditi approached the gods in the former age. She brought thither Mayurtanda, again for birth and death. The story is discussed in various places in the Vedic literature, and many other attempts, unfortunately all unsatisfactory, have been made to explain it in a rational, intelligent way. Thus, in the Taittirîya Samhita, the story of Aditi cooking an oblation for the gods, the remnant of the oblation was given to her by the gods, and 4 Adyatas are born to her from it. She then cooked a second oblation and ate it herself first, but the Adyate born from it was an imperfect egg. She cooked a 3rd time, and the Adyate Vivasavat, the progenitor of man, was born. But the Samhita does not give the number or names of the 8 Adyatas, and this omission is supplied by the Taittirîya Brâhmana. The Brahmana tells us that Aditi cooked the oblation 4 times, and each time the gods gave her the remnant of the oblation. 4 pairs of sons were thus born to her. The first pair was Taittirîya and Âranyaka, the second Mitra and Varuna, the third Amsha and Bhag, and the fourth Indra and Vivasvat. But the Brahmana does not explain why the 8th son was called Martanda and cast away. The Taittirîya Âranyaka, cited by Sayana in his gloss on the Rig-Veda 2.27.1 and 10.72.8, first quotes the 2 verses from the Rig-Veda, which give the legend of Aditi, but with a slightly different reading for the second line of the second verse. Thus, instead of, "She brought again Martanda thither for birth and death," the Âranyaka reads, "She set aside Martanda for birth and death." The Âranyaka then proceeds to give the names of the 8 sons as Mitra, Varuna, Taittirîya, Âranyaka, Amsha, Bhaga, Indra, and Vivasvat. But no further explanation is added, nor are we told which of the 8 sons represented Martanda. There is, however, another passage in Âranyaka which throws some light on the nature of these Adyatas. The names of the sons here given are different. They are shown on screen. The last of which is said to remain constantly at the great Mount Meru, permanently illuminating that region. The other 7 sons are said to derive their light from Kashyapa and are alone visible to man. We are then told these 7 sons are considered by some acharyas to be 7 manifestations of the Brâhmanas, or vital powers of man, while others are said to hold the opinion that they are the types of 7 officiating priests. The third explanation is then put forward, in which the distinction of the 7 sons is probably based on the different aspects of the sun's rays in different months or seasons. In support of it, a mantra or Vedic verse, resorting to or shining in different regions, they make the seasons, is quoted. I've not been able to find a mantra existing samhitas, nor does Sayana give us any clue to it, but simply observes the different features of different seasons cannot be accounted for except by supposing them to have been caused by different suns. Therefore, different suns must exist in different regions. This explanation is open to the objection that we shall have on this theory to assume the existence of thousands of suns, as the characteristics of the seasons are so numerous. The Âranyaka admits that certain extent to the force of this objection, but says the phrase above, meaning the number 8, is settled by the text of the scripture, and there is no further arguing about it. In explaining the legends of Aditi, somewhat on the same lines, the Shatapatha Brahmana, it says that 7 alone of Aditi's sons are styled as the gods, Adyatas, by men, and that the 8th, Martanda, was born undeveloped, and whereupon the Adyata's gods created man and the other animals out of him. The 2 other passages, the number of Adyatas is, however, given as 12. In the first, they are said to have sprung from 12 drops generated by Prajapati and then placed in different regions, while in the second, these 12 Adyatas are identified with the 12 months of the year. The number of Adityas is also given as 12 in the Upanishads, while the post-Vedic literature, there are everywhere said to be 12, answering to the 12 months of the year. Muir, in his original Sanskrit texts in volumes 4 and 5, gives most of these passages, but offers no explanation as to the legend of Aditi except as is to be found in the passages quoted. There are many different speculations or theories of Western scholars regarding the nature and character of Aditi, but as far as the number of Adyatas is concerned, we know of no satisfactory explanation as yet suggested by them. On contrary, the tendency is, as observed by Professor Max Mueller, to regard the number 7 or 8 as unconnected with any solar movements. A suggestion is made that the 8 Adyatas may be taken to represent the 8 cardinal points of the compass, but death or casting away of 8 Aditi seals the fate of that explanation, which thus seems to have been put forward only to be rejected, like Martanda, the eighth Aditi. We've here referred to or quoted the texts and passages bearing on Aditi's legend, or the number of Adiatas, at some length, in order to show how we are apt to run into wild speculations about the meaning of a simple legend, when the key to it is lost. That the 12 Adiatas are understood to represent the 12 months, gods, in later Vedic literature, is evident from the passage in the Shatapatha Brâhmana, which says there are 12 months of the year, and these are the Adiatas. With this explanation before us, the belief that different seasons could be explained only by assuming the existence of different suns, it required no very great stretch of imagination to infer that if 12 Adiatas now represent the 12 months of the year, then the 7 Adiatas must have once represented the 7 months of the year. But this explanation, reasonable though it was, did not commend itself, nor we might even say occur to Vedic scholars, who believed that the home of the ancient race lay somewhere in Central Asia. It is therefore satisfactory to find the idea of different suns producing different months recognized so expressly in the Taittirîya Âranyaka, which quotes a Vedic text, not now available, in support thereof, and finally pronounces in favor of the theory, which regards the 7 suns as presiding over 7 different heavenly regions and thereby producing different seasons, in spite of the objection that would lead to the assumptions of thousands of suns. An objection which the Âranyaka disposes of summarily by observing that 8 is a settled number and that we have no right to change it. That this explanation is most probable of all is further evident from the following. There are 7 sky regions and their different suns, and there are 7 Hotras as priests, those who are the 7 gods, the Aditas, with them. O Soma, protect us. Here Nanyasuriya is an adjective which qualifies Disha Sapta, and the correlation between the 7 regions and the 7 suns is thus expressly recognized. Therefore, the simplest explanation of Aditi's legend is that she presented to the gods, that is, brought forth into the heavens, her 7 sons, the Adiatas, to form the 7 months of sunshine in the place. She had an 8th son, but he was born in an undeveloped state, or was, as what we may call, stillborn, evidently meaning that the 8th month was not a month of sunshine, or that the period of darkness in the place commenced with the 8th month. All this occurred not in our age, but in a previous age, and the words Pruvayam Yugam are very important from this point of view. The word Yuga is evidently used to denote a period of time in the first and second verses of the hymn, which refer to the former age of the gods, and also of a latter age. Western scholars are accustomed to interpret Yuga to mean a generation of men, almost in every place where the phrase is met with, and we shall have to consider the correctness of this interpretation later on. For the purpose of this legend, it is enough to state that the phrase occurs twice in the hymn, and where it first occurs, in verse 2, it clearly denotes an early age or some division of time. Naturally enough, we must therefore interpret it in this way where it occurs again in the same hymn, in the verse describing the legend of Aditi's 7 sons. The sun having 7 rays or 7 horses also implies the same idea, differently expressed. The 7 months of sunshine in their different temperatures are represented by 7 suns producing these different results by being differently located, or having different kinds of rays, or as having different chariots or horses, or different wheels to the same chariot. It is one and the same idea in different forms, and as the Rig-Veda puts it, 1 horse with 7 names. A long dawn of 30 days indicates a period of sunshine for 7 months, and we now see the legend of Aditi is intelligible only if we interpret it as a relic of a time when there were 7 flourishing month gods, and the 8th was either stillborn or cast away. Martanda is etymologically derived from Merta, meaning dead or undeveloped, and anda, an egg or a bird, and denotes a dead sun or a sun that has shrunk below the horizon. In Rig-Veda 10:55-5, we find the word mamera, died, used to denote the setting of the daily sun. The sun is also represented as a bird in many places in Rig-Veda. A castaway bird, Mertanda, is therefore the sun that has set or sunk below the horizon, and the whole legend is obviously a reminiscence of the place where the sun shone above the horizon for 7 months, and when it went below in the beginning of the 8th. If this nature of the sun god is once impressed on the memory, it cannot be easily forgotten by a people simply by their being obliged to change their residence, and thus the sevenfold character of the sun god must have been handed down as an old tradition, though the Vedic people lived later on in places provided over by 12 adhyatas. That is how ancient traditions are preserved everywhere, as for instance those relating to the older year in the Egyptian literature previously referred to. We have seen above the peculiar characteristic of the Arctic region is a varying number of the months of sunshine in that place. It is not therefore enough to say that traces of a period of 7 months' sunshine are alone found in the Rig-Veda. If our theory is correct, we ought to find references to periods of 8, 9, or 10 months' sunshine, along with that of 7 months, earlier in the shape of traditions, or in some other form, and fortunately there are such references in the Rig-Veda, only if we know where to look for them. We have seen the sun's chariot is said to be drawn by 7 horses, and that this sevenfold character of the sun has reference to the 7 suns conceived as 7 different month gods. There are many other legends based on this sevenfold division, but as they do not refer to the subject under discussion, we must reserve their consideration for another occasion. The only fact necessary to be mentioned in this place is that the number of the sun's horses is said to be not only 7, but also 10 in another place, and that if the first be taken to represent 7 months, the other must be understood to stand for 10 months as well. We need not, however, depend on such extension of the legend of the 7 adhyatas to prove the existence of 9 or 10 months of sunshine was known to the poets of the Rig-Veda. The evidence, now going to cite, comes from another source, sacrificial literature, which is quite independent of the legend of the 7 adhyatas. The Rig-Veda mentions a number of ancient sacrificers, styled our fathers, who instituted the sacrifice in ancient times and laid down for the guidance of man the path which he should in future follow. Thus, the sacrifice offered by Manu is taken as the type, and other sacrifices are compared with it. But Manu was not alone to offer this ancient sacrifice to the gods. In 1063-7, he is said to have made the first offerings to the gods along with the 7 Hotris. Arthavan by his sacrifices is elsewhere described as having first extended the paths whereupon the sun is born, and the Atharvans, in the plural, are styled our fathers, along with those shown above. Dashvagas are said to have been the first to offer a sacrifice, while in 1092-10, Arthavan is spoken of as having established order by sacrifice when the Vrigas showed themselves as gods by their skill. Philologically, the name of Atharvan appears as Arthravan, meaning a fire priest in the Avestas, and the word Angiras is said to be etymologically connected with the Greek agilos, or messenger, and the Persian Angara, a mounted courier. In the Taittirîya Brâhmana, Angiras are said to be the same as Angara, burning coals of fire. Whether we accept these etymologies as absolutely correct or not, the semblance between the different words sufficiently warrants the assumption that Arthavan and Angiras must have been the ancient sacrificers of the whole ancient race, and not merely of the Vedic people. Therefore, even though Manu, Arthvaran, and Angiras be not the names of particular individuals, there still can be little doubt that they represented families of priests who conducted, if not originated, sacrifices in primeval times. That is, before the Aryan separation, and who for this region seem to have attained almost divine character in the eyes of the poets of the Rig-Veda. They have all been described as more or less connected with Yama, but it does not follow therefrom that they were all Yama's agents or beings without any human origin. For as stated above, there are a number of passages in which they are described as being the first and the most ancient sacrificers of the race, and if after their death they are said to have gone to Yama and become his friends and companions, that does not in any way detract from their human character. It is therefore very important in the history of the sacrificial literature to determine if any traditions are preserved in the Rig-Veda regarding the duration of the sacrifices performed by the ancient ancestors of the Vedic people in times before the separation of the Aryan people, and see if they lend any support to the theory of an early circumpolar home.